I hope you're all well. As Caroline said, my name is Sunny Dolat. I am based in Nairobi, Kenya. I have a background in hospitality. I have a BSc in hospitality management, and I worked in hospitality for about 5 years. I started out my career at a boutique property in Nairobi called Tribe Hotel. But then at a point, I shifted into working in TNA. So I also work with She Trades on the textile and apparel sector here in Kenya. So my experience kind of spans between tourism and hospitality. So that's a little bit about myself. Let me just start sharing my screen. Okay. Okay. And so today's webinar, we're going to be looking at product development for the tourism sector. I think that with everything that's happened this year, number one, because of the pandemic, but also because of all the socio-political things that have been coming up across the world over the past couple of months, there's a lot of uncertainty about what travel is going to look like and when travel will resume and kind of like go back to, I suppose, the way that we've known it in the past, and that perhaps that might not even be possible in the foreseeable future. And so I think there's general agreement that there's definitely need to really build domestic and regional tourism and products. And so that's what we're going to be looking at today. So COVID-19 has had quite a devastating impact on global economies, and one of the hardest hit sectors is hospitality and tourism. As borders slowly reopen, we've been starting to see that new spikes in places where they were able to flatten the curve, and so this has led to the reinstation of movement restrictions. And so therefore, in the short and midterm, local and regional tourism are most likely to sustain the hospitality and tourism sector. And so I think, there's all these different kinds of tourism that exists globally. But I think that obviously this time is a really good time to really try and understand and get a sense of what domestic and regional consumers are looking for. For instance, and I'll forgive me for giving predominantly examples for Kenya, because that's where majority of my experience is based. So when you look at Kenyan tourists and what they're looking for, you have your adventurers and people who are looking for thrill seekers. So those are more active sort of tourists. You have people who are a lot more reflective and inquisitive. You have people who are a lot more spiritual, people who are looking to relax, people who are looking for wellness, people who are looking for a culinary experience, people who are traveling for cultural reasons or cultural experiences, people who are traveling for festivals, people who are traveling to find the sea, people who are traveling for medical reasons, people who are traveling for weddings. I think for me, the thing that's always been really interesting about Kenya is that because of the way that Kenya is positioned, we were very lucky, especially in East Africa, to have the beautiful coast that we have. And so when it comes to regional, one of the biggest attractors obviously is the coast. So your Mombasa, your Lamu, your Watamu, your Diani are quite attractive as destinations for travelers from not Tanzania, but Uganda, Rwanda, Ethiopia. And because of our beautiful beaches, you find that a lot of people from those countries also come to do their weddings here. Destination weddings have really been a big thing over the past couple of years. And because Mombasa, Diani, and Watamu are quite close, those have been particularly popular with Rwandan and Ethiopian tourists. So really starting to get an understanding of what the travelers from the different countries are looking for, I think is a key foundation as we start to build itineraries for domestic and regional tourists. And I'm sure this is something that a lot of you have encountered, that a lot of people have been talking about the future of travel as being experiential travel, that the future of travel is not sedentary. It's not these very rigid packages that we've been seeing in the past, whereby, you know, if you're coming to Kenya, for instance, you come, you land at Jomo Kenyatta, you're transferred to the national park, to a property in the national park, you go to the Mara, you go to Amboseli, and then you leave. Travel is really shifting, and the things that people are looking for are really, really shifting. People are a lot more interested in travel that's a lot more immersive. People want to experience culture. People want to experience people. And so this has really been shifting the way that itineraries are being designed. And I'll just kind of like hop out. I don't know how many of you are familiar with the platform called Tastemakers, but this is the Tastemakers website. It's a US-based tour operator, and their products that they provide are tours on the African continent. It's owned by an African-American woman, and one of their biggest narrative is this connection back to Africa. So they design packages across Africa, and sell them to African Americans. Sorry, if you could please just, someone unmuted themselves. You could please just mute yourself. Thank you. So if you look at this kind of itinerary from Tastemakers, you see there's an interesting mix of the kind of quote unquote touristy things that you'd expect to do in when you come to Nairobi, which is like, for instance, your Giraffe Center, your Daphne Sheldrick, but then you also start to see a lot of more immersive experiences. So like, for instance, you see here, they have a day that explores the city art scene and creative scene, and you get to meet curators and local creatives. And I think that these are things that we haven't traditionally been seen being included in many itineraries, but they're increasingly what people are looking for. So like, for instance, you see this day 3, which is a Nairobi photo walk. I think that these are really key things to start to think about as we build domestic and regional itineraries, and also international, because I think that, not I think, but I believe that people are certainly more interested in tourism that's more immersive. So the task for tour operators is to understand how a travel experience can truly change us, and by us, this is in terms of tourists, and provide customers with a new, unique, and authentic way to understand our world. And this was an excerpt from an article, which I'm more than happy to share later on. And so, you know, in the case of Kenya, Kenya is a really interesting country because there's such a vast variety of landscape and experiences, but I think that we're so used to seeing the same itineraries, right? So it's that you go to Masai Mara, you go to Amboseli, you go to Mombasa, you go to Diani, but there's all these other places, all these completely unexplored places. And, you know, if you go back to the kind of like categorization of the tourists, you have right at the top, your adventurers and thrill seekers. And these are people who are interested in discovering places. They want to be among the first people to go to a place. So, you know, here on the left-hand side, we have the desert in Suguta that a lot of people haven't really gone to, understandably, because I believe there's some accessibility issues in terms of like bandits and things. So it remains mostly inaccessible, but, you know, I know there's a couple of people who've been working to organize that, even if it's like day tours or a way for people to be able to go. But there's a lot of places like this throughout the country. And similarly in Ghana, that, you know, you have your areas and your sites that are really, really pushed and everyone knows. but then that the country has so much more to offer. And so how do you start to package products, even for locals, that they're able to see and discover new parts of the country? Because that'll certainly be quite exciting for many people. And then also, how do you start to design itineraries that encourage new ways of interaction and new experiences? Again, these are all pictures of from Kenya. This is on the left-hand side, you have a lake. I believe this is Lake Ellis on Mount Kenya. You have the Matthews Range, you have Turkana. And again, these are all places that you don't see that much of. These are places you don't hear that much of. And I think that, to be honest, there's a lot of people who live here who probably aren't even aware of some of these destinations. And I think that these are the easiest to start to unlock, to unlock right now. Actually wanted to, okay, no, it's fine. I'll go back to that in a second. And so I think that these are, for me, the most important things to consider at this moment when you start to design new itineraries for domestic and regional is if someone, for instance, if someone from Rwanda has been to Kenya 3 times, what more can you offer them? What new experiences and interactions can you design for them that will have them be like, aha, okay, I actually haven't experienced that, and I'd really like to go to Kenya for that experience. I think with every tour operator and every hospitality provider, you start to build this kind of internal knowledge about what different markets are interested in. One of the things that I discovered last year from a friend of mine who's actually Rwandan is that a lot of Rwandan women have been coming to give birth in Nairobi because the healthcare systems are better. And so there's this really interesting emerging medical tourism situation that's happening with Rwandans coming to Kenya to give birth. And because they end up staying in Nairobi for about a month, maybe even 2 months, there's also some interesting things that they're exploring with accommodation. And I think that for me was interesting because I hadn't really, it's not really something that I'd heard. And the minute that I heard it, I was curious to find out if anyone was starting to offer some sort of package, whether it's the hospitals offering a package or even a tour operator starting to offer these packages. But she was telling me that it's become really, really popular, and a lot of them really like Nairobi Hospital and Aga Khan in particular. And so this is an example of the kind of nuances that exist in the different markets. Perhaps the Ethiopians are doing the same thing. I know, for instance, someone was telling me that Ethiopians, the Ethiopian elite, come to do their banking here in Nairobi. So again, from your experience with tourists from these different markets, there's certain things you may have discovered that really give you a head start in starting to build these really interesting experiences and these really interesting products. Because sometimes these products are not necessarily about sightseeing and going to climb mountains or see hills. Sometimes they're a bit more practical or more out of necessity. And it'd be interesting to start to hear from everyone, if there's any particular, actually what some of these knowledges are that you've gathered over the past, you've been operating. One other really interesting way that people are starting to build these experiential itineraries is by working with curators. And that's why I wanted to hop back on to the Tastemakers site. So, and I know that this is something that we've also seen happen quite a lot on Airbnb. Airbnb have a service called, I believe it's called Airbnb Experience. So for instance, if I travel to Accra, and I want to really get a sense of the city and what the city has to offer. And they're also designed around a particular interest. So maybe I'm interested in food, maybe I'm interested in local drink, maybe I'm interested in craft, maybe I'm interested in textile. Then they start to design activities and itineraries that that are able to address that. So I think that tastemakers do have some really incredible curated experiences that they sell. And usually they sell these as an add-on to the itinerary. So you can buy an itinerary from them, and then you can also buy some of these experiences. What's interesting about these experiences is that as a local tour operator, it's also possible to sell them to locals. So like, for instance, so this is a bunch of them. And in some of the countries, they work with local curators to design some of these. So let's have a look at, for instance, there's this Stone Town photo walking tour in Zanzibar. And they tell you a little bit about that experience. The price is $48 per guest. It's going to go for about 4 hours. This is a cultural experience. And you can see what the $48 includes. It's a walking tour, you get local snacks, you get bottled water, and you also get a digital photo album after it. There's one that's a bit more culinary. So for instance, this is also in Zanzibar. It's a night food crawl, and this is $43 per guest. Duration is 2 hours, category is food. You can see what's included, your food tour, your beer, and your walking tour. And so there's some really, really incredible, I'm trying to go back up, yeah. There's some really incredible examples of some experiences that are designed. You can also see here an Adire workshop. Adire is a Nigerian textile that's dyed using indigo. And this is for obviously people who are interested in textile, people who want to make something, people who are interested in the arts. So again, these are really amazing products and really accessible, because for $74 per guest, $70, these are also things that you can sell to locals who would be interested. For instance, I know that here in Kenya, there's a textile factory up in Wote that makes silk, and there's a really small tour operator that started doing tours every weekend, 1-day tours that you go up to the factory, you see how silk is made, you get to make something, and then you go back home. And I think they're pricing that at about either 3,000 or 4,000, and includes lunch. And from what I hear, it's been really successful. So these are also kind of experiences that you can sell locally. And also in terms of the kind of experiential international itineraries, or even regional, I wanted to show you an example of a yoga and wellness itinerary. And this is of a platform called Voyemo, which I think is Portuguese. And this is a 14-day trip to Malindi. And again, you see the breakdown. So this is an itinerary that's focused on yoga and wellness. And so that's the focus. There's no game drive, there's no safari. Everything is focused on yoga and wellness and meditation. So you can see that the key element of this itinerary is daily yoga and meditation classes, 2 meals prepared fresh, 2 massages a week. Because that's the focus of this itinerary. And so again, going back to our list here, is to go through the list and see if you're able to offer itineraries to more than half of the kind of travelers listed here. Festival travelers is something that's really picking up. In East Africa, we have quite a number of festivals that are becoming quite big. There's There's a really big festival that happens towards the end of the year in Kilifi called Kilifi NYE. It's about a 4-day festival. And usually they start selling tickets, I think, in about February. And then accommodation sells out by about April. And so, there's Nyege Nyege that happens in Jinja, there's Afropunk that happens in Johannesburg, there's Chalewote that happens in Accra. And so festival tourism is also becoming quite a big thing. I've actually been to Chalewote, and I wish I would have booked with a tour operator, because I was booking everything by myself. It was quite difficult to manage juggling the accommodation and the transport, but it's also because I couldn't really find anyone who had a product. So I had to kind of like build the itinerary myself. Another key thing about the way that people are experiencing travel nowadays is through Instagram. So Instagram or Facebook are a big component of how people are experiencing travel. It's how people are sharing. And so it's another thing to really consider as you build itineraries, is that as you're building these itineraries, beyond the, beyond the kind of like normal and the obvious, are you also creating opportunities and moments for people to take really beautiful imagery? This photo on the left is a property in Lamu called the Majlis, which I believe is by far the most photographed hotel in Lamu, or even at the coast. And yeah, I think that it's there's a clear reason why, and it's because for them, they've always been very intentional about creating this very photographic property. And so even for people who only swing by for lunch, it's always a really great photo opportunity. So I think really starting to have that in mind as you design the experiences, as you design the itineraries, is really important, because it's become really central to how people experience travel. Okay. As I mentioned, there's been many shifts around the global social political climate. The murder of George Floyd in the US and the protests that followed have shifted many things about the way that people are thinking and people's sensitivities, especially around race. And there's a part of it that also began last year. So obviously, Ghana last year, you had the year of return. And this really started to foster this feeling and this narrative of return and reconnection between Africa and her diaspora. And I think that is something that will continue to grow. If anything, I feel like it'll be enforced this year with everything that's happened. But beyond that, there's also been a rising sense of Pan-Africanism. Africans are very aware of the fact that, they haven't seen a lot of the continent. So you're finding a lot of people, especially young people, who are being very deliberate about seeing their continent in its entirety. So I know people who have lists where they're like, in 2020, well, at the beginning of the year, they were like, I want to go to 10 African countries, I want to go to 15 African countries, I want to go to 5 African countries. And I think that intentionality about visiting of Africa is something that we're really, really seeing grow. And I feel like it'll only grow beyond where we are. And so that's something that's really important to have in mind. And again, that's exactly what platforms like Tastemakers Africa are really capitalizing on and tapping into, is that desire, that hunger, that intentionality to see the continent by the people who live in it, right? There's also increased visibility for Black-owned businesses. Again, while the protests were happening, while everything was happening in the States, the impact was felt globally. And so a lot of publications, a lot of platforms started sharing names and lists of Black-owned businesses. And this was from everything from Black-owned clothing lines to Black-owned hotels, Black-owned restaurants. And again, I think this kind of intentionality to be diverse by platforms and by publications is something that will continue. And again, is definitely something to have in mind. Um, and what this also has meant is that everyone and everything is under scrutiny. Here in Kenya, there's a lot of properties that are white owned, and that's been a problem for many of those properties in the past couple of weeks. If you look at a lot of the conversations that have been happening online, um, people have really been confronting this idea of what the Kenyan international tourist product is, with a lot of people saying that it's still quite deeply anchored in colonial nostalgia. So it's that whole thing where you can come to Kenya and you can wear your beige safari suit and you can go and see the animals and you interact with staff in this kind of odd way where it's kind of like you're their master. And so a lot of people have been confronting that. And one of the ways that people have really been calling out properties and operators is by looking at what their marketing assets look like. So what does your Instagram look like? What does your um, Instagram look like? Your Facebook look like? So a lot, especially for the higher end properties and operators, like for instance, here in the center, you'll see that's a screenshot from the feed for Safari Collection, which is the group that also manages Giraffe Manor, which is one of Nairobi's most luxurious properties and exclusive. But when you go through their Instagram feed, it only has white guests. And all the Black people who appear on their Instagram feed are only there in positions of servitude. So drivers, waiters, and guides. And so, they've really been called out for this because people know that there are Black people who have been staying at Giraffe Manor, but this kind of very deliberate erasure of those Black guests from their feed is quite problematic. And I can also share some other examples. So let's see. If you look at an operator like Karen Downey, for instance, who are super, super luxurious, but when you scroll through their website and all their socials, you only see Black people again in positions of servitude. So same thing with And Beyond. You find the same thing. And this is why I think that it's really important to do what I'm calling a marketing audit. Again, everything in the world right now is so sensitive and so volatile that you would hate to be kind of like caught on the wrong side. So if it's an issue of just kind of like scrolling down your Instagram feed and making sure that all your imagery is diverse, it's representative, and you're not, kind of falling into this trap where people have been accused of only appealing to international tourists and only now speaking to local tourists because there's this crisis, right? So I think this conduction of a marketing audit is really important. So you make sure that you have really strong inclusive imagery, and obviously now is not really a good time to take or commission new imagery, because then it becomes really difficult to plan with while still having to observe, like social distancing and everything. But that perhaps if the first phase of your audit is just to, kind of archive the pictures that are potentially problematic, and then you can plan for the taking of new imagery at a later time, then I think that's absolutely fine. Are there some questions? I've spoken so much. I think if you want to ask a question, you can just go ahead and unmute yourself. Or you can send them in the chat.
Thank you, Sunny, for going through the presentation. Yes, so everyone, now the questions and answers are open. So if you have any questions for Sunny, especially regarding the potentials that are available because of, for instance, the Black Lives Matter or the opening of the FCTA and how trade is now open within the African countries, and this is going to make it easier for tourists to travel within the continent, or on the marketing audit, please feel free to unmute yourself or use the chat option.
And I guess while we're waiting for some questions, I can also just share, there's a video that I came across of, there's a local blogger, her name is Natalie Tewa, and a good chunk of her content is travel related and hospitality related. And earlier in the year, she did a Mount Kenya hike, and a friend had sent it to me about the time that it came out, because what she did that was really interesting is she used a different road to go. She went through Chuka, I think. Let me just make sure I'm not telling lies here.
Just got here. It's been a long drive, honestly. Come with a 4-wheel drive. But look, Her Majesty right behind me. So right now we're just transferring our stuff to give the porters and maybe eat something because it's been a long day. We were planning to come earlier, but we got late. So we're here. It's now like, what, 3 p.m., I think. So we're going to hike to Lake Ellis, 3-hour hike. And then, yeah, we'll camp there.
And I think for me, the thing that was really interesting about this video is the way that she, one, I guess showed a very, well, for me anyway, showed a very different experience to climbing the mountain, because she didn't go up to Lenana. She only went up to the 2 lakes. So that's Lake Ellis and Lake Michelson. To be honest, I didn't even know about Lake Michelson. I only knew about Lake Ellis. so I learned something from her video. But also the way that she was really able to break it down and tell people, you know, like, yeah, the hike to Lake Ellis is 3 hours and it'll cost you this much. And the responses, if you go through, people were really, really, really amazed. And she shared like contacts and all costs. And I thought that was such a brilliant way to introduce like a new product to people, although she's not an operator. I thought that was really cool.
Hi, Sunny. So we have a comment plus a question from Veronica. So a comment first is that she thinks fashion architecture and interior design is also playing a role in travel and tourism. So her question is, how do we price effectively for domestic and regional tourists, given a redesign of itineraries to a more experiential feel? I can't even say that.
It's a slippery word.
Yeah, it is.
Sorry, do you mind just saying the question again? Is it in the chat box?
Yeah, it's on the chat box. It's in the chat box. So just how do you price effectively for domestic and regional tourists? And especially if you have to redesign your itineraries to focus more on experiences.
Well, I think obviously and especially with East Africa, is that, and actually I think generally locals anywhere, is that obviously the market is quite price sensitive. So you have to be careful not to price too many people out. You want it to be something that's accessible to many people. In this webinar series, there will be a webinar on pricing by someone who knows a lot more than me when it comes to pricing. So I'd encourage you to listen in on that webinar. But I think that, you know, when you first, I think that the first place is to first design the itinerary, right? And then you also want to create a few itineraries at different price points. So like, for instance, we have an experience itinerary that's at, if it's for local, like maybe at $100, and then you want another one at like $200 and another one at $300, then that way people can kind of pick whatever works best for them and whatever they can afford. So maybe that would be my approach. And I do agree that this kind of place of interiors and design and architecture is, again, quite a big part of how people are experiencing travel. And that's why, again, Lamu has really become one of the key destinations for Kenyans, is because it's a very photogenic, it's a very photogenic city. And I think that's kind of like the main reason. Yeah.
Hi, Veronica. If you can access your microphone, if you want to do a follow-up question with Sunny, please go ahead.
And I'm just in the question. And Veronica, maybe just to add, I think, and that's the key to experiential travel, is to leverage the kind of cultural assets that already exist. And I think that you're absolutely right to say fashion, architecture, and interior design. Going back again to a property like the Majlis, a lot of people, actually, I think pretty much everyone who goes to Lamu has to go to the Majlis at least for lunch or for drinks. And I think that there's a reason for that. And it's that appeal of the way that the property is done up and its architecture. Whereas when you think about more, I don't want to call them basic, but I guess more basic properties, they don't really get photographed that much. And that really just kind of goes to show you the way that people lean and what they want to see when they're traveling. And perhaps one way to start to think about it is, obviously, like, you do your research. If maybe it's a destination that you're not too familiar with, if you can find a contact who's on the ground who can maybe give you a sense, if you can speak to people who've been there before, if any of your favorite influencers have been there before, chances are that they've featured it on their blog or on their vlog. But I think that the research is important. And maybe that's where even collaborations coming into play. So going back to tastemakers and seeing the way that tastemakers have been able to collaborate with in-country curators to design some of these experiences, because then you're working with someone who's on the ground, who knows the place well, to design these experiences. Yeah.
Thank you, Sunny. And we have another question from Muduri. So the question is, what would be the difference between cultural appropriation, appreciation, and stealing? And she gives the example, for instance, when you look at The Lion King, the movie, or Beyonce's new work, and how they use our assets and locations and representation of that. So would you say, how would you categorize that? Would it be like cultural appropriation, appreciation, or stealing? And then to build on that question, she's asking, how can storytellers co-create with communities so that it goes more to the appreciation rather than the appropriation and stealing?
Ooh, that's a question that has like a million answers. I think the thing with appropriation and appreciation, there's many layers to that in and of itself, because obviously as Kenyans, we can't appropriate Kenyanness because we have a kind of blanket permission to access of cultural assets. Issues of appropriation start to come in when there's, number one, a power imbalance. So when you look at the global north and the global south, and the global north is your Europe, North America, and then your global south is Africa, Asia, South America. And when this kind of like global northern countries take, whether it's ideas, inspiration from the global south without monetary exchange, without full credit, then that's when appropriation starts to happen. I think that the issue with Beyonce and Lion King is really complicated because there's so many layers to it. Because, you know, like Beyonce she's not a white woman, she's a Black woman, but that in the ways in which she's, I guess, working and building this narrative about Blackness, it also is very extractive from the continent and the visuals and identity of the continent. But then she's not doing it here, right? So, like, for instance, I think it was the video for the Lion King music video that ideally should have been shot in Kenya, because Lion King is set in Kenya, it's set in Amboseli, but the video was shot in California. So then, you know, Kenyans were really upset about that. And that the second insult was that in the album, there wasn't a single East African artist who was featured, despite, again, the fact that the Lion King story happens in Kenya. So there's many, many layers to this whole issue of cultural appropriation and appreciation. In terms of storytellers co-creating with communities, there was a really great, let me see if I can find it, video that was done by a couple of artists where they went around, they went around the country and they recorded different sounds from different communities and created this really beautiful video. So maybe I won't play the whole video, but that just gives you an idea. I think it's a really beautiful example of a piece of work that an operator or a property can co-create with creatives that showcases culture. It showcases the country in such a beautiful way. So I thought that was a really good video. I'll show you another example. And this kind of goes back to, I think that it's really, where is it? The importance and the key to collaborate and work with storytellers, because, you know, that's kind of their strength. So this is a video to showcase Nairobi as well as Tribe. It was called Nairobi in a Day. And again, I won't play the whole video, but the thing with that video was that when we made that video, we wanted to really show Nairobi in this very young, urban, cosmopolitan way that you don't really see often, that you can come and there's all these great stores that you can go shopping, that you can go to art galleries, that you can go to all these fantastic bars. And most importantly, it showed like Black Kenyans enjoying their city, which was something that wasn't really happening at the time. I think we made that video in 2013. Yeah, and I'm still very proud of that video. So, and going to answer your question, Mudhuri, yes, I think that video for me, I think is a really good example of how operators and properties can collaborate with storytellers to start to make all this really beautiful, meaningful assets. So whether it's videos, whether it's images, whether it's music, I think that the possibilities in that space are endless. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Sunny, for also sharing the videos and providing your insights. We have another question from Veronica. She's asking, for Ghana, there was a leverage on Year of Return, which was targeted to African Americans. So in this case, how do they attract local and domestic or regional tourists who want something different in addition to the Year of Return?
I think the key thing is to start to understand what the domestic tourists are looking for and what the regional tourists are looking for. So like, for instance, the Nigerians who come to Ghana, if you're able to get a sense of what they come for and what they really enjoy, then I think it gives you an opportunity to start to design an itinerary that can cater to that. And same for local, right? Like, for instance, from here in Kenya, you know that perhaps a safari itinerary might not be necessarily too appealing to Kenyans, because a lot of Kenyans at some point of their lives, maybe even in their childhood, you know, like they've seen all the animals. So a safari itinerary might not necessarily be the thing that they go to. However, they're interested in culture, they're interested in fashion, they're interested in nightlife. And so how do you then start to design an itinerary that's able to cater to that? Unfortunately, I don't know too much about the Ghanaian tourism market and product, and I'm ashamed to say that because I've been to Accra a couple of times. But actually, even for me, the way that I enjoy the way that I enjoy Ghana is that, for one, I've never really been able to make it out of Accra, but like I spend a lot of my time on Oxford Street, like going between restaurants, looking for plantain and going to Jamestown. And so I'm more likely to pick an itinerary that's centered around food and culture more than anything else. But again, that's me. And different markets have all their nuances. So I think that to start to gather that intelligence is your starting point. I hope that answers. I know I don't know if it's been very helpful. There's a couple of people who've asked about the marketing audit. So I would break down the marketing audit into 3 steps, right? The first is, essentially it's the same thing, but you're doing it across all your social media platforms. So you're doing it on Facebook, you're doing it on Instagram, and you're doing it on your website. And literally all you're going to look for is to make sure that there's a balance of kind of, I mean, to be blunt, a balance between Black tourists and white tourists, because that's currently the issue. People are very sensitive to those optics, so that then your social media channels and your marketing doesn't only have Black people in positions of servitude, right? And I think that might be something that we see maybe more in Kenya than in Ghana. I haven't seen too much of it in Ghana, but I've definitely seen a lot of it here. And I think, you know, this probably started quite a while back, probably well-intentioned, because the idea was that it would appeal to international tourists. But I think that then over the past X number of years, because of the lack of balance, what a lot of people have found themselves having is that they only have photos and material of white tourists and nothing else. So that's what you want to be able to kind of balance out. If it's already balanced, then that's not a problem. You have no issue. But if you find that your feed has maybe a lot more white tourists than it should have, then what you might want to consider is archiving some of those images. And even if by the time you archive, all you have is pictures of like the property itself, or people or nature, then that's fine until you're able to get new imagery. So I hope that explains the marketing audit. We will be able to go into it a bit more in detail as we do the coaching. I see something here from Regina. Very eye-opening presentation, especially for those of us who are new and operating in areas other than known tourism destinations. My question would be, how do you suggest about creating attractive products in counties that have not been explored much, like Meru County? I think, honestly, when it comes to opening up new areas, there has to be some sort of collaboration with someone who has a lot of visibility. And so this is where you see, whether it's Brand KE or Magical Kenya, or even tour operators or properties partnering with influencers. So like, for instance, I think it might have been 2 years ago or 3, when the tourism board was trying to open up Turkana. I think they took a group of about 10 influencers for about 3 days to Turkana. And so suddenly, you know, we were all seeing all these pictures of Turkana and all the really beautiful beaches in Turkana on our Instagram and Facebook. And so everyone was like, okay. I didn't know Turkana looked like this. And so unfortunately, I think that that's the only way to collaborate with someone who has visibility. And then, you can understand why Bonfire usually partners with all these influencers and celebrities, because they have the visibility. And with that visibility, you're able to capture the attention of the public. And I agree, like, I think that Meru is one of the most beautiful, most undersold destinations. Meru National Park is absolutely breathtaking. I don't think I've ever been to a national park that's more beautiful than Meru National Park. But then I almost never hear about it. And so there's a lot of potential, and there's a lot of places to open up. Kathy, yes, regarding selling festivals, I think that, yeah, you're absolutely right. In this kind of short and medium term, the selling of festivals will be highly unlikely. But I think that it's important to start to think about them just in case, fingers crossed, things do open up. So like, for instance, the Kilifi Festival, that happens in December, I think from about it starts on about the 28th or 27th and runs till the 2nd of January. And so even if you just design the itinerary and you don't publicize it yet, but you have it, you have it on your computer, and depending on how things pan out, because I think that best case scenario for where we're at is that as of September, we have found a vaccine for COVID, we are all vaccinated, or COVID has somehow miraculously disappeared. And so no one is really worried or anxious about being in crowds anymore, in which case then, September would be a great time to start to sell all these like New Year's festivals itineraries. Yeah. So that would be my advice about the festival's itineraries. I think you can start to design them, because it doesn't really hurt to create the product and then just hold on to it until the time is right to put it out. That's from Paul. Can you be allowed to include such videos on the website? I mean, if the video is yours, absolutely. It can be on your website, it can be on your social media channels, but yeah, it has to be yours. You can't take someone else's video and put it up unless you've had a conversation with them. So yeah, if a video is on your website, on your socials, it has to be yours, or that you've had a conversation with the owner of the video and they've given you permission. Okay, I think I've kind of like scrolled through all the... Caroline, have I missed anything?
So we've had new questions coming up. We have one from Regina. So she really likes your answer that you gave. She's asking, oh wow, that's a lot of information. Give me 1 second. I have to scroll back up. So she's asking, do you have any idea about the cost of using influencers?
I don't off the top of my head, because it depends on the influencer you're working with and the sort of engagement. Kathy has responded here and said Eric Omondi charges 150,000 per post. But also Eric Omondi is like, he's one of the biggest, forget even being an influencer, he's one of the biggest celebrities we have in the country. So that I would expect him to be expensive. And again, that's why I'm saying that it really depends on who you've approached and what the format of the engagement is. A lot of the big influencers are really expensive. They average somewhere between 80,000 and 100,000 per post. But then you have smaller influencers who are trying to build their following and aren't necessarily as expensive. And so I would really just, yeah, take time to find the right person. Ask as many as you can. I would, unless you have the budget, I would avoid the big influencers, the big names. Someone is here saying Akode is 1.2 million a month. Yeah, honestly, I would expect that much. But then on the other hand, Kathy is saying that the Kadiwa Jesus and smaller charge 35,000 per post. So you're able to see the massive difference between the 150,000 per post of Eric and the 35,000 per post of the Wajiza's family. But then also you want to find someone whose brand you're aligned with, right? So going back to to the example of Akode, I think Akode is a very particular kind of brand and a very particular kind of engagement. And I think one of the biggest issues that sometimes people have with brands have with partnering with Akode is that she's like herself as a character, she's so volatile. And so it's very easy for you to be in a partnership and then, you know, she just kind of like goes off on this rant on Instagram about something completely unrelated. And then she receives all this backlash. And then in some way your brand suffers because of that association. So I think it's really important to take time before partnering with an influencer to do your research, to do your due diligence, and only partner with someone who you're aligned to. I think that that's really important. Yeah, and Mudhuri has said, so the influencer economy is quite expansive and there's different kinds of influencers. What a lot of people have been talking about in the last 6 months, actually not between 6 months and a year, is the use of micro influencers. So these are much smaller influencers. They don't necessarily have the same reach as some of these big names. They don't have 500,000 followers, 1 million followers. They have a following that's a lot more modest. So anywhere between 20,000 and 30,000. But then they're a lot more accessible and they're a lot more affordable and also a lot easier to work with. So we've been seeing a lot of brands working with micro influencers, not just locally, but also globally. So I think that that's also really important to have an eye out for micro influencers. If you want to have a sense of some micro influencers and generally influencers who work with hospitality and tourism. I'm sure a lot of you in Kenya know the travel magazine called Nomad. Nomad quite often work with a lot of influencers in the tourism space. So you could always follow Nomad and kind of see who they're working with. And then you start to get a sense of who the big influencers are and who the micro influencers are.
Thank you so much, Sunny. I actually have a question for you. I got this question based on some of the posts that Mudhuri has been sharing. I see that she's used a lot of different Instagram posts to advertise different tour packages. And during your webinar, you had for instance, gone through a few market segments, for instance, the millennials who are more intentional about their tours to make sure, for instance, they may be Black owned. And then you had also mentioned about now the regional tourists who are more specific, maybe for medical or luxury experiences. So I just want to know if you're going to start marketing your regional and domestic products, are you supposed to use the different platforms to reach the different markets? So for instance, we know the millennials are more active on social media, but then where does this leave the websites of the tour operators, for instance, the accommodation providers? Where should you focus more of your energy?
I think that I'm maybe a little bit more biased because I feel like there's a lot more engagement on social media channels, especially Instagram over everything else. And I can only speak as myself. It's quite rare for me to go to websites, and I don't think I know a lot of people who do, unless it's for something that you're going to read an article. But you know, a lot of people nowadays are spending on average, especially from the time the pandemic started, we're averaging, I think, 3-4 hours a day on Instagram. So I think that Instagram is a key platform for selling product and for advertising. And what's really amazing about Instagram is that it allows you to be a marketing platform as well as a selling platform. So, you know, you have your pictures there of the trip or the components of the trip. but then there's also the possibility that someone can send you a message and inquire about the price and even book, right? So I think that it's really important for people to, and we'll also talk about this when we talk about, when we go into marketing and communications, but social media is huge. It's huge, huge, huge. I would really strongly encourage people to really focus on their social media channels, especially Instagram. Instagram is really big for tourism, for fashion, like everything lifestyle related. Tourism is really big. So I think that, you know, when you're designing your itineraries, it's also important to design, to have really strong visuals for them, and that you're also designing flyers that you can put out on your social media. I think that's really, really important. Not unless you're, because I think that every of those travel segments are on social media. So your luxury travelers, they're on social media. Your wellness people, your millennial, you know, your Gen Z, your adventure seekers, all of them, they're all on Instagram. I think the only people that aren't, that you might not necessarily find on social media, and even that, like, they're there, but perhaps the engagement is different, is now your like ultra luxury travelers, who the way to sell to them is slightly different. Yeah.
Thank you, Sunny. I'll just open the floor for one last question if anyone has any questions for Sunny, and then we can round up the webinar. Okay, then I think we can conclude the training. So I just want to say thank you once again to everyone for logging in. We'll share the webinar recording and also the webinar presentations with you. And on my side, we will send out the confirmation emails for those who have been selected for the coaching. So I thank those who have registered, and look forward to hearing from us tomorrow COB with the confirmations. And I would also want to just tell you that Sunny will be one of the coaches. You've already been introduced to Mary Ragui and also to Ms. Angela Njehia. So these will be the 3 coaches for the upcoming coaching, and we really look forward to having you on board. So I'm gonna wish you all a good week ahead, and see you next month for the next deep dive webinar.
Thanks, Caroline. And thanks, everyone.